Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fialka. Today is May 16, 2025. I want to thank Rob Grant's amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. Also want to thank Will Erickson for introducing me to Mike M. Woods for part two. Where in the heck you calling in from?
Chicago again. So I'm finally back over.
Chicago was where we did part one on August 24th. I learned so much about digital sickness and you're healing me as an activist, because what most impressed me was you covered. Oh, I have to make one correction. In the middle of part one, I go off on this tangent. I go off on a million tangents, but I start to explain the guy who invented TV in America, and I never said his name. His name is Farnsworth, and he did it supposedly by looking at the wheat fields in Iowa, where he's from, and he sees that sort of mosaic visual patterns, of the wheat heads. And that's sort of where he got this. What I was talking about was Surratt preparing us for mosaic sensibility and visual with pointillism. He was inventing electronic pointillism, and that was when you were touching on these major McLuhan things without knowing it. In a way, one was effects precede causes. The other one was sense ratio shifting, and then center without margin. So I was really blown away. Here's the first question. McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So I ask you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore? And I know it's not everybody, and maybe we don't, but why do people ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Oh, very good question. Now, I think there's a willful need for people to hold on to a form of escapism. And if we take it to the sort of psychical model that's established by Jung and Freud, then the superego has that property. Especially if you consider that post mass communication, when the psychical model has now been stretched and also most likely needs to be reclassified, it needs to be a new nomenclature. That superego has extended its what I think its capacity to create an illusory reality. But what has also happened is that the element of what shame is has shifted. So because the societal shame, because of the moral shame, and the way in which that has slipped. Oh, my apologies. Speaking of shame, this I have shame for. This is a social.
You didn't read my pre-instructions. It says, put your cell phone in the other room.
Oh, I need to.
It's really supposed to say, no, you'll like this. Talk about media activism. We went to the Led Zeppelin screening at USC with the big IMAX.
Yeah.
And as the lights were going down, I said, stick your cell phones up your ass.
And I created shame for me now.
Yeah, I think the lady next to me started to shiver because she was like, is this guy going to attack me? Because literally people can't go to movies without their cell phones on.
No, and my mother, who is the person who is the culprit this time, calling me when she wants to get in I just went right to airplane mode because I know her. This will be a 3 or 4 call cycle where she will be repeatedly getting in touch with me for something that is not an emergency at this moment. But thank
Yeah,
you.
but M, my favorite bumper sticker? Question authority, but not your mother.
If I was sane, I would do that. Unfortunately, no. I have silently transgressed, not as loudly as my younger sister, and I realized that she had a much better approach. Instead, I kind of just like tried to be like the quiet rebel. Otherwise like kind of hid underneath the authoritarian structure. But all love to my mother, but she's a very strict woman.
Yeah,
Um,
but one last thing.
yeah, yeah.
Give her give her a big hug and a compliment and said she did a great job raising you. There's something she did because what you do on this planet is amazing and you're teaching me so much. So
Oh no.
tell her I'm complimenting her.
Oh, yeah, I will. I will. I'll tell her that because you know what? Sometimes I need something. I need a little ammunition back. My God. Well, okay. So we were on this sort of idea of what the super ego accomplishes, right? And I that's why in my work I make this sort of like fake psychical model where there's something called a super id, where instead of like the ego's function for shame, it essentially just adopts like the almost hyper obsessed, hyper sexualized id into its illusory form as well, and uses those both capacities. So I think that in a way we come accustomed to sort of being in that state of sort of hallucinatory zone. That's in part generated by that. Now going back though, shoot, what was the root of the question
Right,
though?
but I the root of the question is why do humans ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions,
Well,
even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
yes. And it's because they also hate the artists, because the artists oftentimes tell them exactly why and how to rid themselves of the illusory zone, or this hallucinatory zone. People want to exist within any form of comfort that's given to them. And I forgot where I had read it, but there's this concept of like the ice cream effect, where because some things like refrigeration or television or microwave or ice cream, these what would used to be really difficult to procure, technology has now allowed for these kind of delicacies, or these things that to be commonplace, and therefore there's some way that assuages a level of discomfort, but provides a very low level amount of comfort. And we have that with the television. Even I remember in my younger, like when I was younger, it was the idea like you wouldn't have a color TV. You have a black and white TV that will only have a couple channels. And like the big up was that you would have a color TV with a whole bunch of channels, and you have all this variety then. But we've gotten to the point where now we have all of the variety we want, and that actually can be quite easy to achieve from somebody who is near the poverty wage, dependent on like the cheap technologies that we have to access, for instance, like cheap or free channels. Like there's now what seems to be a well, or a near endless well of escapism. And so, despite the cautionary tales that artists often tell, on one end, you have a populace that does not want to hear it, because it would require them to actually live in despair, and to then have to deal with sort of deeper political reality, as well as an absurd existence that requires them to actually ponder maybe a even spiritual existence, a deeper than organized religion, spirituality. Um, that in itself is scary, because it replaces the order and the almost how-to guide of capitalism. Those with privilege, in particular, believe that how-to guide is always there for them, and so it provides them with an ability to go back to stability, even if they do wander off away from capitalism at some point in their life. And I think that the last thing I'll say is that when it comes to the artists themselves, I think remember sort of like McLuhan is saying that real artists are those who don't understand the fads or don't exist within those trends. And so there's also maybe a distinction to be made with the real artists. Like there's a lot of con artists, and they also help to drive away people from this source of consciousness, or radicalizing consciousness that can exist within avant-garde art, and in the most inclusive sense of that front line we were talking about, I remember before as well. So that's my answer.
No, that was really good. It brought up a lot. But just to keep it fun and playful, which I loved about part one, is you somehow you open up the floodgates for me to like go back in my head and pull out these things that are funny and revelatory at the same time. And one of them is I made this short film, and it's like glitch art. It's like VHS tapes that are sort of the stuff you make, VHS tapes that don't play properly.
Absolutely.
And it's these women dancing. And one of the comments says, it reminded me when I used to try to watch porn on cable TV, and they scrambled it. Like, still, I'm gonna still watch the scrambled because I can see a little.
Well, that's the thing, though. This is a perfect idea, actually, because the scramble was there. Like, I mean, I hate to say this, I was a teenager, all right. So, like, I understand what this means, right? Like, at one point, you'd see the very beginnings of the image. And it was almost like Baudrillard's idea of seduction for pornography, right? But it was like the seduction was the glitch.
The glitch has seduction. There's a good title for a workshop.
Yeah, there you go.
But the other one is Blue Collar. It happened to be a film I was an extra in, Schrader's first film. It's really a great film. And Richard Pryor buys a TV because he's a shop worker, and he's so proud he could buy his own TV. And it's in the era where in the middle of the night, the TV stations would go off. So for, this period in the middle of the night, it would just be a test pattern and in static. There would be no TV shows. And his wife goes, all you do is watch that TV. He goes, damn shit, I bought that TV. I'm going to watch it even in the middle of the night when there's just static. But this is the other thing you said, bringing in super ego, Freud and Jung, that the superego has a property to willfully not pay attention to these hidden psychic effects. Is that innate in humans, or did we learn that? So you kind of imply has a property. To me, it's implying that's innate in humans to avoid that, to ignore the hidden psychic.
And to be specific, right? The superego has the ability to cause, in the classical model, right? What Freud believed that it's responsible for a lot of the lack of memory of the trauma that relates to whatever the symptom is. So if there was a person with fainting spells, or a person with a phantom limb, or their limb would just go, things like that, that are tied to what Freud considered to be like his actual scientific evidence of psychoanalysis as being a cure and an actual cure to end these symptoms. And it's through the revelation of the trauma, right? Now, the what's argued by Freud and Jung is that the superego has a function that allows for an illusory lack of memory, not just the lack of memory, but also at times very strong illusions of a reality that doesn't exist. And so, what I'm arguing is, well, if we take it to the point where we live in a society that has become so immoral, right, so knocked off of any scale of conscience, not just morality as a, but rather the sort of innate conscience that guides us and has very strong physical implications as well. If we live in bad faith, let's say, and that bad faith is kind of viral and that's sort of generating everywhere, then we can say maybe that the superego has evolved and no longer needs the function of shame, but rather the illusory part, the part of it which can, in fact, create all sorts of delusions, binds instead with the stronger drive, which is the super id driven by Thanatos and Eros, but on steroids, because it's also been given a mirror that is ever evolving and becoming further immersive, to the point of almost fitting our reality like Borges's map of the world that is in tatters because of the map that's laid on top of it. So I think that it's important to think of it like as like obviously me being an artist and playing with these ideas more than anything, but that there is some truth to this um, uh, radical change, even between the 70s and the 2020s, of the idea of what is censored, let's say, from a perspective in the public sphere versus, and I don't want to get caught up in freedom of expression debate there, but rather that the public sphere itself, or what we have come to accept as public discourse, has become further and further saturated with a form of nihilism, and Trump being a major centrifuge in that nihilism.
Yeah. Really good. Do artists have moral obligation?
Yes, absolutely. I feel like because artists are people and people have moral obligation, that moral obligation simply being that if you feel suffering, that others suffer, and the suffering of others is enough of an ethical motivating factor for your time here to be justified. I'm not saying that we need to go out and find a purpose. I think that our purpose is found directly in the inequities that we see in the world. It's not our job to quote correct those inequities. It's our job every day to work towards something in good faith, and to do more towards that than towards exiting and escaping, which I think is a form of the same nihilism. It simply takes the time that could be put towards those communal efforts and eliminates them.
You're really articulate and concise. I appreciate this. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Oof. I think I am less interested in what people, I think, in art refer to as new ideas or new ways of viewing, especially the materiality of media. I don't give a fuck, really, if something is new. Um, I think that we have gone through a 2,000-year philosophical loop, and we always end up back with that we live in a material world with an potential infinitude, that we never will understand, with a despair where nothingness helps to dictate and orient our being. And yet, in that material realm, we find ourselves with ethical obligations and absurdity. And what do we do with that? We have not answered that question. We go back to it. So, regardless of what new ideas there are about how we look at things, I'm interested in how we unify some of the ideas and different disciplines so that we can kind of answer crucial questions about what we're conditioned or what we're motivated to do as humans.
Wow. So, can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Oh, yeah. So, for whatever reason, like, and this must have been when I was like 2 or 3 years old, but I distinctly remember my grandmother pushing my face into my birthday cake and it had Mickey Mouse on it. So it was very young.
Into the birthday cake. Wow. Was it a pleasant or were you freaked out by it? Did you
I think
like it?
it was a little bit like a baptism event when I got baptized very late, so I got baptized when I was 9. But like when I remember that, it almost felt like things like, "Whoa." There was like a weird blankness to the world all of a sudden, and then I remember feeling something like, and people laughing and then being really happy about it. So that's
Right.
it, right? It's just, but yeah.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Oh, for me, it is actually. Oh, I've got to be careful what I say when I say this. I am really happy to have the memory that I do. I'm a Gnostic Christian uh, adherer slash like I guess student. And so in Gnosticism, this is a really important question. What happens is the final pairing of the emanation of God is Sophia, wisdom, and Sophia has to pair with Memoria. The Memorial is faulty in part because it's part material. And so Sophia's double falls to the terrestrial spheres, where the Pistis Sophia has in the terrestrial spheres has to protect her light from being eaten by a demon that she's created solely to keep the material world um, in check, basically, so that it has a sense of order. And through that, I think that there's something about memory that we have to hold dear to because it is the only means by which we hold Sophia, this wisdom, with us and can achieve gnosis. But memory also, for me, locks in a lot of traumatic memories in my body as well as in my physical memory. And sometimes that can be a deep curse first thing in the morning. So it's about you being grateful to have memoria and to try to aim oneself to that larger task of keeping one's light despite the material woes that come day after day.
Tell me someone within your immediate family who had an impact on you and what specifically was that impact?
Mhm. My grandmother, who has been in rather terrible health recently, so I'm putting out some good vibes to her. My grandmother really raised me as a child. And when I was 4 years old, she took me and bought me a piano out of nowhere. She was a house cleaner. She had relatively humble financial means, but I didn't know because she spoiled the heck out of me, and that's what made me an artist.
Wow, that is beautiful. Tell me the same question, outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact, and what was that impact?
Okay, I got to talk about this guy too recently. So there was a professor of mine named Daryl Wilson at New York University. And Daryl is, for the folks who are the weirdo kids who go to that school and end up realizing, maybe a little bit too late, considering we're supposed to be smart, that this isn't the place for us. Well, thank God there was Daryl Wilson, and Lynn Sachs, of course, and for a good time there was Amos Poe as well. But Daryl became my mentor, on the advice of two other professors, Joanne Savio and Marco Williams. And I would say that when I looked for a mentor, finally there was one who was there with open arms, who accepted and was delighted with every idea that I had. Oh man, I'm gonna start crying. Um, and it really, oh, it meant a lot to me, especially so young, to have somebody who cared about my ideas, who saw my passion and didn't just push it away. A lot of the experimental film scene was that for me as a younger person too, when I was 18, 19, 20, and just trying to express, my passion about this type of work and making alternative cinema. And so I have a lot of resentments, and in part because of just the way had treated me. And Daryl treated me like a human being, and also as a extraordinary artist. And to have a colleague like him afterwards, but have a professor at the time, meant the world to me. Yeah.
So beautiful. Yeah. My mom taught me a great thing about crying too. When you cry, you get emotional release, but you also get toxins out of your body. Physically, it's helping you too.
There you go. See, that my body knows I need to. I need to.
but Joyce invented the ultimate word, laugh tears. He took the word laughter and added two letters, A and S, and said the human condition. You laugh and you cry. And the two letters he added is as, A and S, which is metaphor, and all words are metaphoric. So there, he covered the waterfront. So
I love that. That's perfect.
were you raised a particular religion?
Well, so my mom technically was married to my biological father, even though that guy really didn't show up. Long story short, back in the early 90s, it was much harder to get an annulment. And so my mother decided not to get me baptized in the Catholic Church because of the hassle. So I was like kind of technically excommunicated. Later on, they had me get baptized as a Presbyterian. And so I taught Sunday school, and I used to go to midweek Sunday school, and I used to go to like the summer Sunday school. I, because my family's Latino, like it was Catholic when I growing up, and the Presbyterian church, especially in Evanston, was a lot whiter. So it was a totally different kind of feeling being inside of that congregation. I would say then I became very atheist, and then all of a sudden, like when I was going through kind of my own period of creative madness, I decided that some elements of my atheism were essentially just nihilism, and I had to find something that made sense to me based upon my study of existentialism and thinking about sort of like the existential phenomenology kind of branch of philosophers, because they spoke to me, and that really made sense. Sartre made sense, and I think a lot of people think of Sartre as being very atheistic. I mean, sometimes he himself speaks that way. Atheistic philosopher. I don't think so. I think that in some ways it just different terms. But yeah. Any long story short, yeah.
No, that was good. Do you pray?
I do. Yeah. I prayed even recently. I went to Ecuador and went to a Catholic basilica with my grandparents and prayed for a while. And I prayed. I prayed quite a lot upon the death of Aldo Tambolini and my partner Aisha too. They, I think prayer is something. I'd say art is a form of prayer, and through
Yeah.
you, not the other way around. Like we pray using our inside self to talk out. And when
Yeah.
I do, I talk to everything, and I put my I into the you, and then just channel that out. The who is receiving is not important. It's more important that I believe that there is something beyond me,
Yeah.
um, and that has some kind of psychic effect. The karmic reaction, even in myself, has a ripple effect. What we do to ourselves karmically is um, has an effect on everything else. Especially if we're conduits, we're consciousness. If we come into relation with others, it's also the same as keeping ourselves away. In many ways, it's creating a reaction across a chain of different complex systems. Um, so I think of it that way as well, where we are part of a massive complex system, and we have to be really mindful about how we engage. So prayer is a means by which to communicate deeply within, which is a universal within.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
I think that God communicates through its being in a form of the wholeness of its being that's beyond our ability to perceive in our very, very material and very minute self. But upon death, I won't need God to say anything to me
Yeah.
because I will be God. And
Wow, to say anything. Well, aren't you already God?
I am. So are
Yeah,
you.
yeah. But I'm saying,
But we're stuck with a very finite perspective right now.
yeah,
Beyond it, I don't know. And for all I know, I could be stuck with a smaller perspective after it, right? I I think that that's part of the not knowing at the very least is the humbling, right?
that's
Part of it.
amazing.
And then when you I don't know, the one thing I do know is this. Jerry, you're an awesome part of God. And I'm so glad that I get the opportunity to speak with you
I
or
appreciate.
to enjoy your company.
No, I appreciate it. I love you dearly, man. I mean, the minute you kicked my ass with that program in Ann Arbor, like, what the fuck is this? This is shit. And then the ultimate was, I says, have you ever entered the Ann Arbor Film Festival? And he goes, yeah, like 8 or 10 times. I never got in. I says, I can relate, but this really beautiful what you say, and then believe me, I spent so much joy listening that 2 hours we spent together last time. But it is funny because you have this philosophical sensibility that I want to ask about. But before I ask the roots of that, like what age are you reading Sartre? Is it high school? But before you say that, do you know most people when I say, what do you want God to say to you after you die? They go, you did a good job. That's what most people want. They 80%. And then maybe a couple say, welcome home. And the Solomon Burke did the Charles Brown funeral service I went to, and it was like Bonnie Raitt, Little Richard, everybody was there, and he goes, there'll be no crying. This is a homegoing. A
Yeah,
homegoing.
that's
So
right.
I mean, I like the idea being raised a Roman Catholic too, that oh yeah, there's this thing, whatever. We know like I will become God when I die. I am already God. But it is funny how people put that into that sensibility because of religious iconography. And we talked a little about that. I love that picture of God with the beard, whatever that, whoever painted that, and I dumpster dive them all the time. And it's like, wow, this is cool. And people think, most people, I ask what religion, I used to ask it this way: what religion were you raised? They go Catholic, Jewish. When did you ever check out? Oh yeah, I checked out between 12 and 15. Most people say that. They
Yeah.
go, I checked out. So then I go, well, what do you want God to say to you after you die? And they go, well, there is no God. That's what, they say, well, if there is, I want them to say I did a good job. And then I go, do you pray? And the best answer ever was this woman goes, yeah, for parking spaces. But it was really beautiful. Where did you get that? And fine tuning a sensibility, what philosophers are. In high school, was there a teacher going, read Sartre? Or was there your parents or your grandmother saying, read this? Because you have this Kierkegaard, Baudelaire, you can quote these people and you just don't quote them. You know how to put them into context.
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. Part of it was this. My I was a very nerdy young kid, in part because I was a sickly kid. I had
Right.
a heart. Well, I still have a heart that's wrapped around my trachea and my esophagus, and so
Yeah.
as a result, my heart has always affected me. It's always given me pain throughout my life, and I had surgery when I was 14. I couldn't engage in sports, and I was kept inside. So I became an avid reader and became. They gave me Encarta Encyclopedia on CD, and for when I was very young, like 8 or 9 years old, my stepfather. I don't know if he was my stepdad at the time, but he let me start using his computer to go onto Encarta Encyclopedia and started reading. I eventually, it's very strange to say, when I had first access to the internet, I almost knew where to look or what to look for about things that interested me, and I was always drawn to the ontological question. I was always afraid that there's a possibility that everything's not real, right? And that fear drew me to horror movies and horror short stories, folklore, which I think is very much at the core of a lot of that work too, especially the work that I liked. Edgar Allan Poe. Now that's
Yeah.
what really fucked me up. I was
Yeah.
9 years old and I started to read Edgar Allan Poe.
That's good.
So that drove me, I think.
Wait, but here's the line that I tell people, and they go, "Holy shit!" It's like Poe spawned the symbolist. The symbolist spawned the rock poets. That it doesn't matter what you say; it's the effect you want to produce.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
that and he did effects precede causes. He invented the detective novel
Yeah.
and said, I'm only going to give you a little info and you're going to fill in the rest. So I got you trapped. You're in. So somehow you got hit by this Poe early and got that. Yeah.
That's it. You let
But
murder to the
again,
root board. That's a good
but
one too.
see, you're happy and laugh, but you're like, I was in pain, and your whole thing in part one is despair. And I goes, is despair good? And he goes, yeah, God, it's great. Despair is
Love this man. I was also really lucky that I was at NYU, where
yeah,
when I realized, oh shit, I don't want anything to do with a lot of the stuff in the film department, I started to go to the stuff in the cinema studies department. I had friends who were giving me some of their course curriculum because that was really important. I then took a seminar on the unconscious. I took a course that was on phenomenological existentialism. And
yeah,
through that really built it. But I was already kind of on that route. I started reading Sartre stuff when I was 16 years old, and not necessarily getting it. And that was the key. I had to read it and read it and read it until I got it.
yeah.
Being in nothingness is something that I've read the first 200 pages of it probably like 8 times, just trying to get it. Like same, I went back and reread Fatal Strategies by Baudelaire. In many ways, I'm a slow reader. So that's part of it. Is like I know the work and the canon
Yeah.
of work that I have established right now in my life. I'm 36 years old, not a very avid reader, but
Yeah.
because I have to go very slowly, meticulously, take
Yeah.
notes for every single thing, and I'm just lucky to have stumbled upon things. And people have directed me along the way. But at one point, it was just like looking for music. I would stumble upon the musical thing that I wanted and keep going.
Yeah.
Like and that was when Google or Amazon, even their algorithms for finding things were a lot better too. So like
Yeah.
if you did have interest in one thing, it would spur. So like
Yeah.
I stole Naked Lunch from a Barnes and Noble when I was 15 years old, and that like in itself helped me out going through things. Like
That
I was a
was good.
real big Burroughs fan.
But when you're 15 and 16, are you in high school where the teachers are going, yeah, read Sartre? Is that all extracurricular? That's outside the school. They're telling you to read this other stuff and you're reading your own stuff.
Yeah, I mean, by senior year, I was in the AP English classes, and what's kind of crazy about my experience in high school, I was going through being a real drug addict, like hardcore drug addict by the time I was 15, 16 years old. It was right after my heart surgery, and I was dealing with both pain and just being bullied constantly. And I think it was through that I really became interested in the idea of art as a means of kind of chronicling what I was going through. It's very much like the Edgar Allan Poe idea, but he says
Yeah.
if you should be hung or be murdered, that you should make a chronicle of it as a means by which to create your art. And so to be sure to keep a record or some shit like that. And then sort of that's a own sort of phenomenological project in and of itself. I definitely I think due to the late 90s early 2000s is this time that I'm coming up at the same time was really between that and some edgelord shit, like there's a lot being dumped upon us as teenagers.
Yeah.
So the kind of new metal and industrial scenes in Chicago, especially, and the punk scenes in Chicago, they were there, and I
Yeah.
had reactions to this. They come with their own philosophies. Hip hop came with its own philosophy,
Yeah.
and that was a part of the culture that I was kind of growing up in too. And so I was thinking about all of the ways these philosophies unite. But I guess where I started to go off was I was really just so afraid by the amount that I had drugged myself that I could somehow fall off the map. And by that point, boom, all of the interests that I bring up in my work, especially, have to do, and all the philosophers that I read have to do in some way with that, either that level of despair at realizing one's finite self, or the loss that occurs through systems that are metastasized because we've already done so much to alter the reality and the ground of our existence. And
Yeah.
Sartre kind of is the for me the car manual for your consciousness, and then from there
You mean Sartre's nothingness is the
being
car
in,
manual?
yeah, being in nothingness, yeah, exactly, it's like the car manual to consciousness. So like if you're looking for the very basics, it's here, but chances are things may have changed from the first edition,
Yeah.
like, so that's part of it.
Well, do evil people exist or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Ooh. Oh, you asked a good one. Do evil people exist? You know what? I've seen evil in people. I'll say okay. I'll talk a little funky. So the numb spiral, I think, is what evil is, and I think that evil is what human consciousness projects into negative values, and that those negative values often congeal into the Western understanding of nothingness.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's why the term nothingness is problematic, because there's many different ways of interpreting it. But what I'm getting at is that the malignant form of this nothingness also has an entire category of values associated with it, and that those values themselves have weight within a human reality that's created. Now, I think that what I've seen, or what I've also read a good amount, is that for instance, in Allah mathematics, which is kind of a branch of the Nation of Islam, that broke off from the original branch. And Wu Tang Clan, for instance, has a lot of about the Allah mathematics in their work. They believe that 85% of people are mentally dead, that 10% of people are conscious, meaning they are conscious of self, but they purposefully act in a way that undoes sort of the foundation or the ethical responsibility that they have as beings, and that there are 5% that are enlightened, that are aware. Now, I would argue that within that 10% lies something that is evil. I've seen people who have something like evil. And I guess what I would say is that is when consciousness is so far off the realm into the numb spiral that maybe something else occupies the body. I don't believe people are necessarily born inherently evil, but I
Yeah.
mean that the consciousness vacates that body, and what is left over can only be spoken, I think, it definitely has a different voice. It
For
almost is
me,
better to say that someone has become evil, because at the very least, it gives them the property of having been a consciousness,
yeah.
and then that their body has now been re-embodied by an evil.
The beautiful thing about that question, Em, is that a lot of people go, do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle? Yeah, people go, yeah, Hitler was evil. They go, but most people kind of hint we're all capable of evil. So, they'll go, well, Hitler wasn't born evil, but so here's the follow-up. The real hidden question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? So I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And, and Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I think that you can acknowledge your enemy so long as you know that your enemy um, becomes aware of the lack of security that they have in your acknowledgement. So, for instance, you don't want to acknowledge your enemy unless it is necessary to get rid of their place in power, and in the acknowledgement, you're communicating to your enemy that their time is up. And that to me is okay. I
Yeah.
think I go along the route of the art of war, right? Which is I'll go to a high spot and then scope out and then attack, because I'm not going to let an enemy, especially uh, harm my family or friends or loved ones, or but me. Now, I think obviously enemy is to be interpreted in many ways, but I'll say this: somebody harms somebody I love, they're dead. I don't care about a law. I will hunt them down. That's the way I view things personally, and that's a
Yeah.
little bit like. But no, I mean, and this is despite the fact that we were talking about all being God and whatnot. This is true too. But I know who I am, and so I have to be who I am, right? Luckily, I don't think anybody's coming for my family. Now, on
Right.
the other end, there are enemies who are soft enemies. There are enemies who play Cold War, and that's we have to deal with regularly. Unfortunately, through art, because there's art politics and that kind of shit. Um, and I kind of agree then with Alan Watts. It's like, yeah, only when necessary to protect oneself and to make revelations when um, people also should protect themselves. That's generally the way that I.
Yeah, this is funny because a skateboarding philosopher in Venice told me the word name is enemy. Words evoke more than their meaning. So, like the other ones are great. American Indians, indigenous natives say, your enemy's your best teacher. In Whitman nailed it. I no doubt deserve my enemies. But like if your daughter comes home and says, I'm being bullied, what do you tell her to do? Or what advice?
I'll tell you. I'll tell you what I did, and this is 100. There were these boys bullying my daughter, and they called her an ugly bitch. And my daughter is 9 years old, and one of them asked her if she had a boyfriend, and he was 15 or 16 years old. And this is in Dallas, Texas. And I went over. Now, mind you, I kept a knife in my pocket. I went over, and I won't say exactly what I said, but I screamed at their door and knocked on it, like pounded on the door. And I let everybody in the entire housing facility know as well that if they came anywhere near my daughter, that they would not even know what the fuck I would do to them. That they have no idea what I would do to them. And that's it.
Yeah.
Um, I think that I'm not a violent person, but I do traffic, and you can see in my movies, in the threat of violence. And I think that speaking of Malcolm X, that is also a very, very helpful tool to utilize, especially when it's, speaking of Alan Watts, obviously, he's a little bit more of a relaxed guy and a lot of self help. But but what I mean is there's some aspect to which you have to protect your own,
Yeah.
especially in times like this. We have fascists essentially threatening the lives of, especially the lives of people of color, and I know that in Dallas, Texas, in Fort Worth, right next to Dallas, Texas, is where Tatiana Jefferson was murdered, and the police murder people. So there was actually a father recently, for instance, who killed the police officers who killed his son. And for me, I say, yeah, good riddance. And that if everybody's celebrating Mangione, I know this has been also others have said this, but yeah, then that father, that black father, has every right to run down that fucking pig.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's the kind of way I view it. I think that the peace and love thing, it just doesn't have historical relevance. Malcolm X was a huge part of the civil rights movement, and then beyond that, Black Panthers and the amount of violent resistance in India, for instance, is completely like eradicated from our record of it because we want to create this kind of thorough idea of peaceful resistance, but it's just not. It does not bear uh, um, very much truth, at the very least, in terms
Yeah.
of historical evidence.
And this is the follow up, Nassim Taleb. Games were created to give non heroes the illusion of winning. In real life,
Ooh.
you don't know who wins or loses, but you can tell who a hero is. My
Yeah.
friend said, hey, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. And Gregory Bateson says, if the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, oh, I did something morally and socially wrong? So again, it's a lot of prompts. The basic question is, does punishment work?
Very good questions. Punishment and shame works so long as the whole populace or the majority of them are against you. Um, I think that that's part of the issue, right? Is like it almost now takes like 90% of people or more to hate you in order for you to actually be shamed out of your action, and maybe not even that. More and more, I think the behavior of public figures, and it makes sense. We live in an absurd reality where the hyper reality has gotten to slapstick almost qualities. Um, and in part, those qualities are there to distract from the deeper genocidal kind of fuel for hyperreality. And so people have become more and more on a day to day basis off the map, let's say. They might also, the people who we interact with on a day to day basis, have worldviews that are further and further fractured, despite the bipartisanship that and the trying to force people through the kind of cookie cutter molds of media persona. Um, so no, as a result, I think we kind of live in um, this nightmare, right? Maybe it's more like the AI consciousness than we'd like to admit. Okay, but let me get back to what was the original
Yeah,
provocation? Big word.
it's good, because the way you said it is like, oh, does punishment work? I've never really refined that because, most people go, well, it's not really where I'm going. One person said all your quotes don't lead to that question, because I'm kind of saying, well, what do you do with your enemy and if they get caught? Because we all know if someone's killing people on the street, it's probably not a good idea to just let them be on the
No,
street.
no, no.
So punishment means isolating them. And then people go, well, rehabilitation helps. But me and you know there's a prison industrial complex. So we know when I go, does punishment work? A lot of people go, no. Well, then what are you going to do about it?
Yeah,
You,
no. In fact, punishment. You make a good point. Isolation is really the only form of punishment, other than death, which is an ultimate form of isolation. Right? Is the isolation out of our reality, or for what we think it is. But then this sort of isolation also creates that prison complex, and I think at the same time, though, the the punishment that we know for the like we can maybe, let's say, what if there were good faith punishment, right? What if we didn't include all of the totally bullshit reasons why people are incarcerated, and we just included the reasons of people doing harm of no cause, or of unjustified harm towards other people. And we just, if we were just to speak to that, right, then then at the very least, punishment must be imposed to stop that person from being capable, or for to keep other people from being susceptible to that person's predatory actions. And
yeah,
in that case, it is simply, I think, a sort of material condition, right? I don't think that punishment beyond that, though, is anything but sadism, right? It's a
yeah,
form of re-employing a sort of like a psychic catharsis upon the other, when in fact we are really absorbing their crimes as beings that are similar to them. In many ways, I find that like it's difficult, even with Trump. Like I find it too easy to empathize with people, and that's a problem, because sometimes you need to be very, very forceful and not accept the crimes of another person. You have to, at a certain point, recognize that there is a point at which somebody is beyond redemption, um, uh, for their actions. Right? That's part of Memoria too. It's sort of like, yeah, we could just say, oh well, the past is the past, and we move onwards. It's very like self-help bullshit mentality. But no, we we and multiple others holds the memory and trauma of the actions, the wrong actions of, let's even say, of different parts of the same organism, let's say. But even in an organism, maybe there would be an action to punish, right? A different part of it. If it feels as though it's having a foreign body or whatever is in the body, you'll form an infection around it. There's a little bit of insurrection to immunity, and maybe that's what I'm getting at is that as much as possible, it needs to be an organic form of punishment. I also say that maybe this is a weird question for me to answer, and I'll put it out this way. When I was young, I remember going to Ecuadorian village with my grandfather. My grandfather was pointing out that in the territory he's from, Tungurahua province, is common in this particular area for people, if there were ladrones or like thieves, that they would be taken out into the field and they would be burned alive. And that's how they dealt with thieves. And then people didn't rob. So,
So it worked. In its essence,
worked.
it worked. Yeah, because here's a three little comebacks that I want to do. I love the Hafiz poem, the Sufi poet. He says, the jailer drops the keys in front of the jail cell door so that he can just reach and let himself out. That's amazing. But if you had a vote right now, yes, I want capital punishment. No, I don't want. How would you vote?
No, I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that, there's a Master Killer verse that's if homicide's illegal and death is the penalty, then what justifies the homicide when he dies, right?
yeah.
It's that. It's like who or what justifies the homicide? I don't believe the state has any right to kill anything or
Yeah,
harm.
I always say you don't want to turn into your enemy. But
That's it.
here's what I used to ask before Trump got in again. And I hate to even say his name or bring him up, but you've slipped his name in. I used to say, if Trump gets busted, thrown in jail, he cannot run for president, and he writes a book and says, I'm sorry, would you forgive him?
No, I think Trump has got to that Mussolini level, where I think that it's very difficult actually to say with Trump. You know, especially with Biden. Let me just say, like, Biden is responsible for basically funding a genocide, and
Yeah,
I think in many ways I have the same level of resentment towards Biden, who I think is also a racist and
yeah.
also a segregationist. So it was like two sides of the same coin, kind of, for me. Trump, though, has a much more apparent form of hatred and racism that white supremacists are behind, and at the same time, it's hard for me to. Um, I was. It's so hard for me to say, especially as I would say that with him, I think justified violence is not necessarily a problem, but like
Well, yeah, but it's also the sorry. He never says he's sorry. Biden
no,
has said,
he never says he's
Biden has said, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Trump's never said I'm sorry. But most people would say, no, I wouldn't forgive him because I wouldn't believe him. So,
no.
anyways, it's a waste. We don't need.
Yeah,
But
I would say that he should not have the opportunity to speak again. Like, that's what I'll end
yeah,
with.
that's like I got to tell you this: the guys who made the Enron movie, the richest guys in the building or whatever. It's a pretty good political doc, busting the capitalists, and they all get thrown into country club jails. And I went up to the producer and I says, is your film really just a training film for up and coming capitalists? And he goes, yeah, I guess so. If I get busted, I get thrown in a country club jail. What's the fucking difference?
Well, I know, and those poor Enron motherfuckers, if they had just waited like a couple of years, they would have just not even had to go to jail. Like
That's
that's
it.
God. 2008 came around and they just got the fucking golden parachute. They didn't even have to go to Club Med or
The
Club
golden,
Med.
but here's I dumpster dove Shock of the New, one of my favorite art books by Robert Hughes, 1980. You know why it's my favorite is there's a picture of a Salvador Dali painting, and in the corner there's a boy with poop shooting out of his butt. In this, in Breton and the surrealist told Dali, "That's not surreal. We're kicking you out of the group." And he goes, "I don't give a fuck if I'm in your group."
For me,
I love
I love Dolly. I can't hate on Dolly, man.
yeah.
Exactly
So,
right. He's like, fuck you. You can't be telling. I am surrealism.
but it is. I always look up at any book, McLuhan and Joyce, if there's any entry. And there, Robert Hughes, page 362, the whole page is on McLuhan. And he says, he's quoting, I just want to, this is a brand new question I'm putting in because it's amazing we're on this word enemy. And he quotes McLuhan on British TV in 67. Marshall said, "The artist is the enemy. But in our time, the artist has become the very basis of any scientific power of perception or making contact with reality."
Yeah.
So you somehow you got McLuhan because he says, "Oh, artists are anti-environmental," and he's not saying they're against Mother Nature. He's saying but is there any? Because I don't understand this whole quote. I'm going to read it one more time. You tell me what you think.
Okay.
The artist is the enemy, but in our time, the artist has become the very basis of any scientific power of perception or making contact with reality.
Yeah. So here's my kind of take on it.
Yeah.
We are the enemy to the institutional stability. We are the enemy to in this case, where we live in now, the cinematic reality that's created by capital.
Yeah.
And we are that because the real artist that McLuhan is talking about. So it must, in fact, I think, also be specifically considered in his term of the artist that's against the trend, not the artist that adds to it and is actually just another part of that institution. And because of that, though, one thing that the artist does is it combines multiple levels of discipline. It creates an actual historical perspective, and it creates also this mimesis that then science oftentimes copies itself, the process, in its considered greatest achievement. And in the industrial revolution in itself has so many different pieces that then become a mimetic answer to the body, right? Or like the car in itself has much of the system there is something that we can observe within another nature. Well, the artist is always in the business of observing another nature. And he's always in the business of observing a metaphysical nature that has no embodiment and attempting to make it material within a pure exteriority that we sense that is the source by which we are able to express. So there's a transmutation of the material that the artist is capable of, that the artist is at the forefront of always. Even if the science technology were to precede the artistic gesture, it's the artistic gesture that gives definition to a lot of the technological uses.
That's really good because I don't know how much you've read of McLuhan. You drop his name sometime, but you touch on so many things. In your knowledge of McLuhan seems intuitive. Like, have you read Take Today, The Executive is Dropout? Do you know what McLuhan you've read, or you've just read about him?
No, I've read a bit. I've read Massage and
Medium is the
Message. Yeah, Medium is the Massage and Medium is the Message. And I've read the Laws of New Media.
Laws of Media? You read that book? That's a hard one.
That was a tough one because that's like literally a rigid system. and it's got
That's
like a foreword from his son. Now, this
Tetra.
is
Yeah,
back
no,
in my
his
college years. So.
yeah. No, and you saying Blackgate, there's so many ways. I mean, when I say I want to do an 8-part Netflix series, I hate saying that to you because you laugh, because I don't want to use the word Netflix. I want to do an 8-part millennial Blackgate, because you know what the other thing Marshall said, because you turned me down to that Blackgate theater. Like, I really want to study that. Because
Yeah.
you know Otto Pine, who started it with him.
Yeah.
Do you know his daughter Chloe?
No, no.
Oh, she's a heavy duty performance artist. Look her up. But
Very
but
cool.
Marshall said that Finnegan's Wake is the Black Mass. In the Black Mass, if you study it, do you know about it? It's a satire of the Catholic Mass. So it's like, what? So I mean, there's so much crossover. Now, here's the other thing, Em. I want to go back to when you dropped Mussolini's name. You
Yeah.
know who? You know the two things Mussolini invented in the cinema world that we're in.
No.
He invented the film festival,
Oh, there. Yes, of course. Yes.
which is now, the people might dispute it, but it's sort of Brian Konevsky always says it from Experiments in Cinema. He goes, Mussolini invented the film festival. And then if you watch the documentary on subtitling, it's really good. And Mussolini insisted, don't subtitle, because you want to swoop them into the movie, because these guys knew the power of movies.
Yeah.
And he said, I want to swoop my people into the power with movies by having them hear the dubbing. I don't want them to read. I want them to hear dubbing, the dubbed voice.
Wow.
So you can study it. There's a great doc on subtitling. But here's the next.
Fucking crazy, actually.
Yeah, I know it. The next one is going to James Joyce. He's the first movie projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. He had a movie theater called Volta Cinema, and he basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" And years later, Faulkner, you being a media terrorist, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. So why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Yeah, no, I don't believe that we do. I think I think I'm maybe of the Joyce. Although mind you, this is where things get difficult, because there's always a chance that you can end up sounding reductive. But I would say that a lot of representational narrative and documentary serves the same function. It only serves to reiterate a cinematic reality, and maybe this is a form of hyper-reality, but it's the dressed up version. A very literal reality. That is there to justify capitalism, and it has most of the media that we consume. It wouldn't get into our media diet if it wasn't already something approved by a corporate entity that chooses, that in itself is made of people who unconsciously justify through a sense of shame. That's what they justify, is their comfort. And so the illusion that they need is to continue to live in a world in which they can escape, in which they can help fund the escaping of others through the same sort of media environment. I'll say this: I have had fights with really smart, people who I think of almost as being a little bit towards the radical side of media. On Marvel, on these other fucking dumb shit movies, and of narrative film and documentary film. And their response is always, oh, well, you know, it's just a movie, or come on, you're taking it. But no, every single drop in the bucket, it's more drugs. It's more fucking toxic, vile shit for the trough, right? And as long as a work doesn't with itself, it has to. It like literally, it's vital that it reach a particular threshold. It's simply not to tell a story, to tell stories about of other stories of people going through things. No, that's a waste of my fucking time. I have reality to deal with, right? We all have reality to deal with. It doesn't matter if it's a story of people who you might not come into contact with here in Chicago, Illinois. It's like, no, that's in itself has a racist implication. So how about go out into the world and meet others? Right? Yeah. So in many ways, it's always like a way that the most sheltered people can learn their information and develop a map of the world so they could go to their soiree and their fucking careerist ass parties afterwards and say what they watched in the cinema and recall what they had there. Well, and they still can't go up to and this is something I've heard complaints about it within experimental film world, just the amount of experimental filmmakers who don't have the grace to go up to somebody else and say, hi, how are you? How have you been? Just be a decent human being. So, this cinema is a means by which a lot of people hide, and they also just gain as much knowledge as they need to regurgitate. And so, anyways.
No, that was I got to tell you why that's brilliant, because I never hear that. Because every time I say it, that question, why do we have to recreate things? They go, well, that's why do we have art? So that we can focus and filter down, because life is boring. And if you filter it down, you know, and I love what you said, because I need to hear that more often. When I said that I asked P. Adam Sidney all these questions, and I said, Joyce, you know, checked out. He said, he never checked out because of that. So Joycean scholars, some go, that's bullshit, because Joyce was doing that. He was writing fiction. So what's the difference if you make a movie of a tree? But somewhere in the Joyce world, I heard that and I goes, that's a good question. So it doesn't matter if I say allegedly Joyce said this or Joyce said it. He's saying cinema sucks because you're recreating something. Why don't you just live it? And so, well, live it in the printed word, same difference. But it is needed because somehow that's what humans do. But when you went into the doc world, because I'd love to do a whole session on docs with you, I just wanted to tell you, in essence, Frederick Wiseman is sort of the godhead and pure documentarians in America. And, you know, I couldn't ask him all 90-minute questions because he doesn't want to talk. He does kind of over 40 years, but I got him in a hallway at USC, and I says, why do you do this? I says, how do you know, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, Charlie Chaplin, Henry James, and I'm a New England Jew. That's the three things why he does that. And what does he call his docs? Reality fiction. What does Alan King, the Canadian Wiseman, call his? Actuality dramas. And what does Ricky Leacock call his docs? Historical fantasies. So it doesn't matter.
More aware of what they're making than a lot of people typify.
But they want to go, oh, that's, you know, I always say Wiseman's the most pure documentarian. He knows if I have it this way or that way, it's going to change. But that was really good, because then you're growing up. You're, you know, you told us your history. You're in, you know, the health problem. Where did you go? Where's your tipping point going? That's my calling. Because you're reading, and then somewhere along the line you get the piano, then you somewhere along the line you're watching movies, and you go, that's my calling. Because I mean, in essence, you're a multimedia artist, but let's say one thing is you're experimental filmmaker. Would you say that's one of your callings? books.
Definitely. No, I think that my cinema experiences are the ones that
Right.
really
Hey,
drove.
where's your calling? In high school, grade school, where'd you go? That's what I want to do. That's my calling.
There are 3 events that really
Okay.
did it. The
Yeah.
first of which, 2001: A Space Odyssey, when I was 9 years old. The Star
Age 9 in the big theater?
No, in my basement on a fucking terrible VHS, and it still stunned me.
Wow. By yourself or did your dad get or your someone coach you to watch it?
That's so my stepfather coached me to get it, and he was like, "Watch this," which is weird, mind you. So then, but yeah, and then when I did, at first I was like, "What the fuck is this?" Like, it. I think anyone who watches 2001, especially from the 80s or beyond, but like it's unlike anything else, right? And
Yeah.
so by the time it got to the Stargate sequence, it was the end, like the room and everything, like the dissolution of time, all of that immediately, it stunned me. I remember just being like, "What?" And like I had lived a nightmare, like, but that nightmare was so, and then it connected me to all the things inside of me that I remember, like, oh yeah, dreams are like this, and wait, people can make work that does this to other people. After that, though, it was I'll say two, like two major, right? Because Mulholland Drive was the other crazy one, and it's
And
really
again, what
sad.
situation? Big theater, small theater? Where'd you see it?
Another small, which is crazy actually. All of my experiences are at home.
On
Um,
what
yeah,
age was that?
this so sorry. The third one, I'll just go real quick, is Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and I
Okay.
had seen that on an old VHS too at home, but it's the Wonkatania when they go into the fucking weird nightmare tunnel.
Yeah.
That when I was much younger, but Mulholland Drive I watched because I'm not friend anymore, but I'll give him this. He was like, "Bro, like I gotta see this. This is crazy." And then we were 14 years old. I was sober. I was like, I didn't smoke weed or anything. Drank coffee. Started the movie around 10:30 p.m. And by midnight, I was, what the fuck is this? My whole everything. Like, just watching the movie, what you become aware of is what Lynch is doing is showing you how motion picture has been used to work upon you, and how narrative is, and how persona is, and identity, and all of these people are strangers to you. These are fake. This is all bullshit. And he's constantly playing that, but doing it so well to build it up and break it down and build it up and break it down. So by the time that the 2 hour point gets in that movie, and he just pulls the fucking rug out from the under the whole movie, where you've already had emotional input and you've already followed it through as to a certain point, and then you see it all fall apart. That to me was like, wow, because it built self-reflection. It built like this like never-ending questioning that happened afterwards, and that developed my consciousness. Like literally, I don't mean to sound stupid or to like starter pack or whatnot, but David Lynch's Mulholland Drive is really the only reason why I make movies, is because I recognize that there was something really ethically right about what he did to me. Before that movie and after that movie, I was two different people. And I never had that experience with anything, like to have something work through you so much so that even more than a drug experience, that it reprograms the way that you think about the world. And so that was my first experience of Lynch. I was 14. I watched the movie like 60 times after that, and every single time I've watched that movie, it never stays the same.
Yeah.
It works very much. What you're talking about with Joyce, I don't think Joyce would have said the same had he had seen work like Lynch, like Mulholland Drive,
Yeah.
because in many ways, what he's doing, what Lynch is doing, is, and I've not read too much Joyce. I really need to read a lot more. But what I have read of Joyce, and trying to read through Ulysses, is when I'm in it, I'm reading three different lines of meaning all at
Yeah.
once. It's not one thing. It's a shape-shifting thing
Yeah.
that has all of its liner notes right there in front of you too. And so you begin to see both the psychosexual imagery inside of the exchanges that we have as people, and then also the garbling of language and how that affects it as well. So all these things together, to me, speaks to, you know, this thing that breaks free from its structure. What experimental film I think has long gotten wrong is that after the break from the surrealists, the idea that the surrealists were wrong. They're not. The surrealists were very, very much right. They just needed to have better sense of self-direction, political motive, and less ego, things of that nature. But I think that there's something very deep to the critical paranoid method as narrative as a vehicle for experimentation as well. And what we've seen as film festivals that has largely rid the Maya Deren, um, uh, Buñuel class of experimental film, even Kenneth Anger
Yeah.
type of experimental filmmakers.
Yeah. Really good. You covered a lot there. And I appreciate this because what I'm curious is what you're seeing Mulholland at 14. When did you go, oh, now I'm going to go get movie equipment and make films? Did you start in high school and then you went right to NYU to be a filmmaker? Where's that path going there?
Yeah, I started as a writer. When I was younger, I used to write these teleplays, like these like little screenplays, and one of them started. This is going back. I was fourth grade, fifth grade. It starred this figure that I call Ugga Bugga Boogeyman. And then I was like really into shit like Saturday Night Live when I shouldn't have been. Like for whatever reason, like I was plopped in front of a television a lot. My grandmother cleaned houses, so you can imagine like a lot of time was spent in front of TVs. And I think that that's part of the reason why like Mulholland Drive fucked me up so much. Is like I was developing a persona as a lonely kid, and my biggest interaction was with television in English. That was my almost only interaction when I was younger, and to the point where sometimes when I was younger, I was more fluent in Spanish than I am now. The experience though is that it kind of like it builds your brain up to think certain ways. Now, I started to experience a love of surrealism earlier. Like I loved Dali, I loved Picasso, and my mother brought me to the museums in New York. So she would give me these books, and I would draw. And then I got to the point where, because I had piano and guitar as musical practice as well, that was always the defined musical practice. But when I was 14, 15 years old, I started fucking around with the camera, a old mini DV camera, and it was after I saw Mulholland Drive that I really began to think maybe I can stop this excessive amount of drug use, which is making me erase my brain, and I'm not feeling. It wasn't a clear cut, but it was a transition, and I became sober. I mean, when I became sober, 16 to 18, minus a few relapse periods during that time, I dedicated everything I had to filmmaking. And so it was Disassociative Productions is my
Not
label.
not through your high school, on your own? Not through your high school or on your own?
No, on my own. But
On your own.
I did have a film lab and media teacher, so I couldn't bring these projects into the high school. But my teacher, Mindy Faber, who actually used to work for the Video Data Bank as well, she was my first entry point into
Yeah,
experimental film, into documentary, into youth culture, into the idea of culture
yeah,
jamming, of building our own
yeah,
independent movements.
yeah,
And she was really radical, and that's why she got fired. She got fired from our high school because she was basically giving us the keys to do what we wanted to. And so I would go into the media lab after I had heart surgery, especially. I used to be able to take advantage of some of my gym period. I would go there and I ditch class and go there. But then I started making beats and making movies. Weird fucking pieces of shit movies. Uh,
yeah.
By the time I turned 18, I would say I was delivered my first actual movie, which people still watch, is called Disney World. And Disney World got popped into my head really as a 19-year-old. And that's the first time I ever made anything of worth that I looked at, and it was like, oh wow, this is something.
But somehow you didn't go, I want to go and make Lynchian sellable films, because in essence, Lynch is a Hollywood filmmaker. He snuck in, and same with Buñuel. They made films in the 90-minute structured film kind of thing, so somehow you didn't go, well, that's my aspiration, because then you go to NYU. Isn't your aspiration at NYU to, because everybody, my friends who teach at Cal Arts and NYU, is they all want to go become Hollywood filmmakers.
Oh yeah, no, I think that I full on was.
But how'd you not do that when you were raised on 2001 in Mulholland? You weren't watching.
I was crazy. Like that was the issue. Like I didn't understand.
I was crazy. I was like, Em, you're implying you're not crazy anymore. And it's like, I was crazy. Now I'm not. You're so fucking articulate. You can say, well, that's when I was crazy. Now I make normal films. I was crazy.
Well, that's the thing though. Like Lynch to me was like, oh, this is like normal cinema, right? And to them at NYU,
and that helped you.
It's like fucking garbage. Like they hated Lynch. I mean, I had
no, I don't think they hate him, but they, No, well, I know what you're saying.
At the time, let's say this is 2006 to 2010. The student body was Judd Apatow movie lovers and Spielberg. Right. So when we're talking like even Lynch is for these folks like, what the fuck is this? Like, I don't understand it.
Like, let me tell you the two quick Lynch things really fast, because I'm showing experimental films and normal films in Ann Arbor from 72 to 80 with the Ann Arbor Film Co-op. Really early, like maybe 74, I see an ad in the Village Voice for this film called Eraserhead. And we were like, what the fuck is this? And the reason I booked it was because it had Fats Waller music.
Yeah,
I learned it had Fats Waller music. I said, we got to book this. When we showed it to ourselves before our audience, we went, what the fuck is this? And then Lynch got famous with Elephant Man, and Blue Velvet kicked Lynch over. And all my friends, I go, Blue Velvet sucks. Eraserhead's way better. And then they would watch it and go, nothing happens. It's stupid. So, over the years in my world, Lynch got too overrated. And then when he died, it was like, oh, I know he's great. And people are like, so I says, he's so overrated. He's a Buñuel wannabe. And he would be nothing without Francis Bacon, the painter. But I love
100%. 100%.
Right, I love that what you tell me, how Mulholland took you from going, somehow it liberated. It's sort of like kids listening to Captain Beefheart, Sex Pistols or Devo or B-52s. It gave them the opening door to do something different. It wasn't them going, I want to be him.
Yes, correct.
It gave them the liberty.
Correct. No, because the truth of the matter is that my issue with Lynch is that he doesn't speak in the certainties that I think is necessary. He never spoke with the sort of political, I don't say imperative. Yeah.
Like would you say Buñuel speaks with political?
No, but Buñuel himself is, because he eschews all form of that expression in many ways, but and uses the work itself. But Buñuel took the surrealism part to heart in his own performance of self, right?
Yeah.
Dali as well. I'd say that the same is true of Lynch. I don't think that that's the case with me. I think that I don't present my surreal self when I'm talking to you, for instance. I present the self that believes that direly that we actually, like, I can put that into the work, and then afterwards we need to speak on human terms about what's holding us back, both in terms of art, but also in terms of our political reality.
But
And so,
that's from your philosophical research? Is
e-
that
uh,
you learned that from studying philosophy?
I think it's more of my grandmother's consciousness, which is this, like, and actually, my ex-wife, I'll give her this too. My ex-wife is black, and you know, I'm white passing Latino, and my family is not. So, like, two checks on my privilege, right? Um, but my ex-wife essentially, when I was going through a period of time, was like, oh, this ontological problem, right? Like, I have a problem. How do you not deal with this? And she goes, because I have to fucking live with being a black woman every day. Like, literally, like, you can go off and have your
Right.
existential fucking crisis. My existential crisis is everything. And so, like,
God,
then, you know, I don't
that's
get that
heavy.
existential crisis till I have my daughter. And then I have to think, yeah, you know what? Right. I don't have time to worry about that shit. I have a daughter who I actually
Right.
have to worry more about. And when you worry
But
more about yourself than you have to worry about others, then
you're a
you're all there.
dedicated dad. You learned I'd say you learned to be a dedicated dad from the way your grandmother raised you.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because my
Okay.
grandmother literally lived for me to live.
Yeah.
And my grandfather.
Yeah.
So my grandmother will also say, it's your work. It's the dedication that you put in, the passion that you put in.
Yeah.
It should be legible in the
Yeah.
work that you do, and then how you present yourself. And
Yeah.
so, I think that sometimes I find that although I understand the way Lynch presents himself, that his presentation of self actually undid some of the truly radical things that are at play in some of his work. And then some of his work, you're right, it falls into the Hollywood
Yeah.
category.
Yeah.
He tries to tie it all together as a means of, like, actually expanding its value, and hugging some problematic works like Lost
Yeah.
Highway, which I love and also hate.
Yeah.
So there's ways like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But here's can you go a little longer? Because we went
Oh
way
yeah, of
over.
course. Yeah, we're good.
Okay. A screenwriting teacher at U of M, in fact, said a great film is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great film,
Yeah.
great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. He's cracking up. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're making an M. Woods film? No assignment, no commission. You're making your film. What role does intention play?
Intention plays every single role, I think, of when it comes to what I am. Sorry, let me. I'll redo this one. My idea is kind of come from a provocation that's almost obsessive. You know, almost think of it more like an itch that I have to scratch, right? And so, to some degree, it's a selfish thing, and it works through me, especially a very strong artistic idea. It works through me in a very physical way. So I don't think I have very much choice when it comes to addressing that thing. Now, when I get to the process itself, I find that the intention has to have already existed, meaning that once I get that physical feeling, and then I have this image, or I have whatever the sensory piece of it is that's bothering me, I then have to ask myself all sorts of things related to it and deal with it and grapple with it. And then I go to an artistic media, and I say everything that happened before now no longer matters. It is just the thing that has prepared me for the moment now, where I'm working with the instrument that I have. And depending on how good at using that instrument I am, and depending on the level of preparation and dedication that I've taken to this active praxis, we will now see what that preparation has provided to me. And the best thing I can do in that moment is prepare my consciousness to vacate, to leave in a form that becomes pure intuition, and to observe more than to speak. That in doing so, I in fact trickle this expression through my day's activities. If it's on set, for instance, then it has to be trickled through the interpersonal relations that I have with other people who I'm working with too. And so I can't simply be in a different state of being. I actually have to channel that being into the being of being the filmmaker that day, or being the painter that day. And it's a moments where I'll have to break myself from that when I become too reflective, lost in the process. And it's through catching up with myself that I then re-imbue that process. Now, that is the production. What comes out of that then has an editing. It has a thing that you live with, that you ruminate over, that then bothers you, and you need to learn how to stew with that. You need to leave that thing when it's not ready, and you need to communicate with it the moment that you feel that intuition rush. And that's just through experience. Experience will tell you just how your random painting gesture creates just that line that you need in that moment, that you need to represent it because your intuition is telling you to do so, but you can't even have it translate. So I almost think of it like language, right? In order to speak Spanish well, you can't translate it. It just has to be embodied, and you have to start to speak it fluently. When you get to a certain point, you recognize that there's instrumentality in everything. What Aldo Tambellini to me was the real maestro of, is you put anything in that person's hand and he find a way to make it art. It did not matter, because the art channeled through that thing as a vehicle. Once he figured out how he was going to use it as a gesture, then he could communicate through that gesture, whatever gesture it is. And so, yes, intentionality plays all this. It's rich and saturated in intentionality. What that doesn't provide anyone with communication of the intention. It provides a complex organism, a system for others to communicate with or to observe.
Yeah.
And that is what the art is.
Wow. You're so articulate. You should be a film professor. Do you teach? Do you ever lecture?
I've taught outside of
Of
colleges and
this? Yeah.
universities for over a decade. Post production,
Yeah. Okay.
stuff like that. I've always wanted to be a professor. I'm on my 60th application, so I was like, literally. But yeah.
Yeah. No, that was really, really beautiful. But
Oh,
this is the follow-up, Em.
yeah,
Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your viewer when you're making your film?
all the time. Yeah, I mean, like, not that I'm thinking of their sensibilities, not that I'm thinking of, like, while I'm making the work. And so, to some degree, I can't do that. If I think that, then I'm going to be cutting off whatever needs to come out. Sometimes, what I put on there is not what I want personally to be out there. I'm got work where I'm there fucking masturbating my flaccid dick on a fucking screen. I don't necessarily want that to be in a movie, but it is. It came out that way. But the thing is, the audience is everything.
Yeah.
To me, it's a communication, and without that, and moreover, in my work, it is an infiltration. There was a 17-year-old who came to my movie at Madison, and he also came, like, to the movie beforehand, to commodity trading, but he came over to see the movie Body Prop. And I was like, holy shit, like, I wish I was 17 years old and like clued onto some radical shit. Not to say like my shit, but like just to think that way, to go and find work like that. And I thought that, well, I'm doing something like that made me feel great. I was justified in my work. Yeah.
That's good, because the first experimental film that had an impact on me, I usually ask people, what was the first film, and it was Blowjob by Andy Warhol,
Yeah.
which is No, there's no flaccid dick on screen. It's the nuance of his head going back. You know, the film and the dots that indicate that the film, actual film, is ending, sort of representing cum or something. Who knows? You know, it is like there's not much to the film. It's just a face, you know. But it was like, what the fuck? You know, so it's so important to see something that shifts you out of, because we're so indoctrinated from day one, because the film I, grew up on was A Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
And have you ever seen The Wizard of Oz re-edited with every word in alphabetical order?
No.
Oh God, you can Google it and see the whole thing. This kid literally, when you go, bah, ooh, ah, whatever word they say, I've got to see the wizard. Every word. So the film jumps. It drives people nuts. If I've shown on a big screen for 90 minutes, it's just like tick, tick, tick. It drives people nuts, but it's so important because there are scenes that flow, but most of it is chopped up. It's driving you nuts. And
Oh, I love it.
when I went to Ann Arbor to go to college, I saw Wizard of Oz on the big screen for the first time, and
Yeah.
I knew exactly where the commercials were put. And I was like, oh, this is where I go and get a sandwich. And I couldn't, because it was a total different setting.
Yes.
So this is McLuhan saying everything we invent extends some humanness. So knife and fork extends your teeth. The shutter in a camera extends your eyelid. And my friend the other day blew me out. He goes, no, it isn't. It's the sphincter in your butt that is what editing does. Well, both of them do that. They edit your eyelids.
Stop communication.
Right, your eyelid edits.
Yeah.
And it's a shutter and a camera or projector. But even maybe philosophy or religion extends consciousness. It doesn't have to be a tangible thing. What does your two main tools are the writing utensil, because you wrote teleplays, you write. What is the writing utensil, whether it's a pen or a pencil, extend, and what is the movie camera, or what, let's just call it the moving image camera, whether it's video or film, extend? What humanness does it extend?
The movie camera extends the same level of despair that I feel as a finite being, trying to project outward the things that I feel inside.
Yeah.
And the movie camera can only use the outside to fill its inside.
Yeah.
And so it kind of forms a perfect, like, symbiotic relationship to that form of despair. You can use the camera not see I like to think of my Bolex in particular, not to imbue it with too much humanity itself. It's a machine, but rather to have care with what goes through it, because I believe that there's a residue to memory that's beyond memory that we hold. This is the interesting concept with facticity. It's not dead. The thing that's on the outside is not not a facticity that is concrete and therefore without consciousness, but rather what Sartre is saying is that there is unbroken consciousness in being in itself, and we break it to be for itself. But the true content of being is unknown to us. And the camera also suffers the same flaw. And so I think that that's why it's a beautiful instrument. It's a broken media. It like the pen, not fast enough to grab the word not perfect enough to form the expression. the camera has an even more immediate capture of this light, and yet it still fumbles in its choreography, and I love that. Like
Yes.
there's something that it does to allow us to explore that lack with more gratitude.
What's the word you use? Fast. It seemed as facsimile.
Authenticity.
How do you spell that?
So Sartre puts this
How do you spell
word
it?
in Factity.
Okay. And what is that? Yeah, tell me.
So Sartre describes it, one way of putting it is this: if I question the world, the facticity of the world is what pops up after I question it. So it's there to answer back, right? The
Yeah.
facticity of things is that which, regardless of my being, whether or not I want to negate it or that thing is. And in that sense, it is the being in itself,
Yeah.
without the being for itself, this other part of consciousness to negate its existence. And yet we can't fully acclimate to it. We can't fully perceive it because in the act of reflection we break it. And this is very similar to kind of the idea of the Schrodinger experiment in a totally separate context, but the idea that we break the waveform with consciousness in the quantum experiment, and that it's in the state of its existence that it's allocated, but that our consciousness in the double slit experiment, for instance, with light, also it perceives a state that is different than the unbroken wave state or waveform,
Yeah.
the universal waveform as it is, right? So we have this universal nature that is broken by our finite consciousness.
You did you see Lynn Sachs' short film on the three female filmmakers?
Yeah,
And I think it's Barbara Hammer has the Bolex in her hand, and she goes, "The Bolex is an extension of my arm and my elbow." You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
and I have to add, have you seen that documentary on the Bolex, by the way?
No,
Oh, dude, you'll freak out. The woman is going to film school. She goes up to her teacher and goes, "My grandfather invented the Bolex."
no way.
He goes, "What?" And she goes, "Oh, I want to make a doc." She found his films. He was making experimental films, but it's you got to see it. It took her 16 years to make it. It's not that it's a great film. It's just a topic that's mind blowing.
Yeah.
Because it's such a great tool.
Well, it's
But
dear
this,
to a lot of us. Exactly. That is
yeah,
dear to my practice.
so much. So again, what would the pencil or keyboard extend for you? What humanness? Because you really articulated that well. What the movie camera extends. What
Yeah.
would the pencil or the keyboard extend for you?
Yeah, it was both. It was the pencil and the keyboard when I was younger as a high schooler, and it was, I would say, as an extension of the lancing of an infection. That's
Right.
really what it felt like. It felt like a purging. It felt like I had to fit my entire soul through the conduit of it as an
Yeah.
apparatus. And
Yeah.
eventually I got to the point, and this, mind you, this is a person very, very much an active user in my younger self, where I would sit in front of the computer tripping, gone out of my mind in all sorts of states, and without really being able to even lift my head up and look at the screen. And I would be there like this, typing away at the keyboard, trying to be on top of the wave of the feeling, to try to make use of a word to match it. And a lot of it was gibberish. A lot of it's just shit. But it was because I was at a point where I wanted to find that perfect filter out. And I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of art that is, or arts, artists who are inclined this way,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of pain also
Yeah.
uh, part of it, but it's that lunacy of believing that there can be a way to distill even a second of the infinite kind of tumble of the inside space. in anything material. You realize there's an alchemy that needs to occur there over time with discipline. And part of the reason you're punished for wishing to have direct expression is because it is asking too much. Right? It's almost asking of a godly potential.
It's beautiful. I asked this Italian poet, what does the pencil or writing utensil extend for you? And he says, my tears.
Yeah.
So that's that lancing was an amazing word, lancing the infection. So let's close out with this one, Emma. It's really been a pleasure and an honor. And it's where the roots of this extension thing, because actually McLuhan got it from Whitman. Whitman's kind of the first one that's sort of saying all these things we invent extend some humanness. And I said in part one, Marshall said technology is the most human and the most human thing. That why do we extend ourselves with all this stuff? Why do we need clothing? We don't, with some reason, we need to extend our humanness. I don't know. But here's what Joyce said in Portrait. I will try to express myself in some mode of life or art as freely as I can and as wholly as I can, using for my defense the only arms I'll allow myself to use. So right there, he's saying, I'm creating this shit to extend my defense, the only arms I allow myself to use. And he summarizes it in 3 words: silence, exile, and cunning. Whatever he means, fine. On your own being M. Woods, how would you take those 3 words that he's extending, silence, exile, and cunning? Do they apply to your sensibility, or how could they?
Wow. Silence is in Gnosticism the first emanation of God, what's called bythos, deep silence in space. And silence is something also entirely foreign to my experience as a person. Although I find a lot of deep thought in searching for something like silence, and I love to go alone into solitude. I would say that the eminence of silence outside of our human reality is something that brings me a lot of comfort. But the extension of it, I find hard to wield within our reality. Now, cunning. Yes, cunning is the only way to survive, is what I've realized. And it's easier for me outside of, awesome conversations like this to act stupid. That's my method for winning at Texas Hold'em. Act stupid, and these motherfuckers will underestimate you. And that's an extension of a mask that I have to wear as a pretty neurodivergent person anyway. I will be judged as stupid because of some of my social, or what has been called social ineptitude, but my own mannerisms, which are sometimes a little bit wonky. But the best way to take advantage of that is to then hold all the cards, the good ones, and always fold when nobody's watching. Always fold. Like literally, you don't ever have to hold on to bad shit. So that's part of it. Now, I will say that there was silence, there was cunning, and then there was a third one.
Exile.
Oh, exile. Exile is something I guess I'm always afraid of, but then when I get it, I kind of enjoy it. There's something nice to being exiled from a job, even exiled from experimental film community. You make your best work when you don't have to worry about that bullshit. And I think that exile is something though that we face inside, and that's maybe what I'll add to the extension idea here. let's say the inside, I actually feel like I have, if I really wanted to, I could sit in a corner and just think all day. I get lost in thought. I dissociate very easily. And so I would say that we have an extensible on infinite ground inside, and we don't even need much vocabulary or other text from the outside for us to study ourselves on the inside and arrive at a lot of the ideas that we see on the outside. In fact, I would say a lot of reading, a lot of philosophical reading, is simply to find somebody to have consensus with. You don't need it, any text. You can find it in yourself, but it's nice to have consensus. It's nice to know that you're not going down the wrong rabbit hole. And as a result, we use art as a means to extend the thing from the inside, sometimes not as a revelatory experience, but just to prove to other people that we have that inside, right? And that's part of the maybe the immature quality of it.
Yeah.
And then later on, we grow up and we realize, no, we have this exterior property by which we can actually communicate with others, and there's
Yeah.
something more important to communicate than our basic ontological structure. It's to worry about whether or not we are acknowledging the livelihood or the being of others, of the ground that we all share to begin with, and what are we doing in the midst of watching others suffer. And so I do believe deeply that that sort of ethical consideration grounds my being. And so the extension of the other is the thing that gives um, physical weight to my existence, without which I'm not sure that I would even care if I existed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's you're anticipating all our questions in part 3, which I'm not going to even say prepare yourself, but I'm going to voice a couple of them, so they will just plant little seeds in your noggin, and you might go, oh, because the thing about your beautiful mind is you articulate shit on the spot. Like, and I'm like, this stuff is exact. I couldn't believe how much your thoughts spurred me in part 1
Oh,
to go into my little, hidden caves. No, I'm serious. It was really amazing how like right off the bat we were flying, because here's the 3. They asked McLuhan, will there ever be silence? And he said, things don't exist on their own. They only exist in relationship. And so that's one thing we'll go into. And the other one is this quote that I'm always trying to figure out by Marshall, saying, everybody experiences far more than they understand. Yet it is experience rather than understanding that influences behavior. So,
whoa.
I don't know if I get that or not, but it's just like him. Uh, he's saying, I didn't start the fire. I just turned the alarm on. He says the other one I love, he says, I'm a safe cracker, and I'm just listening to the ball bearings tickle in the little tuning. And that's what I'm not trying to open the safe or give you any insight, but we're just here trying to figure it out.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Baudrillard says something very similar, and on
Yeah.
nihilism, he's like, I'm not a nihilist. I'm just telling you how it looks to me.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Yeah. And Marshall says, if you don't like those ideas, I got some other ones.
Love it. Love it.
I love you, Em. Thank you so much for your
love.
time and energy. And I can't wait till we meet in person again, but I'm going to send you some dates, and let's book part 3, because this is ongoing, man. It's an amazing revelatory thing that I learn a lot, and I'm grateful.
Oh, I'm loving this, and everything. All of your questions are just so. Your conversation is robust. And it's just beautiful to be able to have somebody else with a real sharp consciousness to give me ideas too. I've been taking notes during this whole thing. No, much love to you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, but I know it will never end, and we'll talk forever and ever.